you're seeing basically, or what I'd like to show you, is what I think is the future of the hills of Sri Lanka. You look at that side of the hill and you see grassland, you see tea that has now going back into grassland, and people are doing annual agriculture, just growing a few crops, and the soil is being exposed. This is one option we have. The other option is here. This is the analog forest. And now I invite you to come along with us and let's enter the analog forest and see the difference. And then we can choose what do we want for the future of this nation, that side of the mountain or this side of the mountain. And if you start looking at the forest and looking at it as what it does for you, for instance, if you look at photosynthesis, when a plant does photosynthesis, what is created inside is a thing called singlet oxygen, 1O1. It's not O2, it's singlet oxygen. Singlet oxygen is extremely reactive. It'll oxidize just anything. So the plant can't hold it. It makes O2, and that highly energetic O2 leaves the leaf. So when you breathe amongst living leaves, you're breathing oxygen that is highly energetic. So I was doing research on this, and I find that people have been looking at this. And when I was in Cuba, the chief oncologist of Cuba, Dr. Fernando, who had listened to my lectures, came 1 year later and told me, Ranil, I listened to what you said. I took some of my patients out of the ward and I kept them amongst the shrubs that we had just outside. And he said the recovery rate was amazing. The healing power of plants. We researched this, and I find that the ancient Chinese knew about this 1,800 years ago. And they were planting trees, specific trees and plants in avenues where people could walk and breathe and take their exercise as they walk through. This is the value of plant life. It's just not just green things sitting there. They are things, fonts of health for humanity. If humanity could only recognize the value of it and use it to create a healthier environment for themselves than what we are creating today. And that's what hopefully this place will help people realize. And short-sighted economic policy, which does not look at anything except immediate profit for some action. Unfortunately, the current thinking of the intellectual elite has completely discounted their past. This completely discounted their traditions. And throwing their traditions away means throwing away the knowledge on how to create a living ecosystem that will sustain you and your children and their children into the future. But it must be thought of as long-term. Traditionally, in Sri Lanka, grandfathers would plant small trees for their grandchildren, knowing fully well that they will never live to see that. That's the gift of life. And it's only plants and trees that can give the gift of life and the gift of health through the air we breathe and the food we eat. And again, to quote the Buddha, he says, the greatest of all gifts that you can give is the gift of health. And that's what the forest, the living forest, gives you. This is for Roton, this one, for Roton, and for Asia, this is going to be so important for the mountains because this tree gives you large beans which
36% protein. And you can cut a branch, stick it in the ground and grow the plant, grow the tree. So for Asia, which is protein deficient, here is the answer.
Well, the thing is, when you start working with a forest, with analog forestry, it forces you to understand what a forest is, because you're trying to create something like the forest. The more you know the forest, the better you can create something that is like it. It's like art. The more you know your subject, the better you can express your subject. So when you begin that process, then it becomes an interactive process. The forest begins to teach you, because you look and say, oh, I never planted that before. Where did that come from? Oh, some bird brought it because your forest. Okay. The forest is now teaching you that it can also bring things. Then when you understand that the forest is teaching you, then you go back to our old traditions that speak about this. When the Buddha says, the forest is the most benevolent and kind of all organisms, he is talking about a thing in and of itself, not a collection of trees, not biodiversity, but a thing. A forest is an organism. Then you realize what he's saying. Because the more you understand the forest, the more you interact with it, the more you realize that it's talking to you, new things are coming, new birds have come, new frogs. That's the way it talks to you. And when you realize that it is building itself up, then you see what parts of it can you help it to build up. And that is how a good practitioner in analog forestry should be approaching a forest and learning from it. Because that's the first step. You don't just go there to plant things to create a forest. No, you first go there to learn from it. And what it teaches you, then you try and replicate outside. That then takes you away from the standard scientific methodological approach of sticking stuff in the ground and realizing there's a little more. First you realize, wait, with this thing I can do aesthetics. I can bring beauty into the thing. I can bring flowering trees, flowering shrubs. Then I can create butterflies, food for butterflies, they will come. And when you start doing this, you realize that the forest itself is actually a self-sustaining thing. And that should, in most human beings, sharpen your spiritual sense. And that is the gain you get from interacting with the forest truly and understanding what it wants to be doing. Most people I know who've entered doing analog forestry, they change. The forest changes them.
And the first time we talked on the phone, you told me also the importance about going to the forest and listening. Why for you think?
Because the forest talks to you all the time. It has many voices. One voice is when the wind goes through. Each tree has a different noise that the leaves make when it rustles. That's the base noise of the forest when the wind goes through. Then the crickets begin. The crickets have their own songs and they come at their own times. But if the forest is mature and growing, there's many voices. Then there are the frogs. So then there are the birds. Together, they are the voice of the forest. And if you learn how to listen to it, you will learn all the members of the orchestra, who is playing what, who is saying what. And usually, forest, when it's healthy, has a great complement of these sounds that come up, and that, to me, represents the voice of the forest. So if you listen to it, at the start there'll be a few crickets and things as your plants are small, nothing will be happening. As your plants grow up and there's more shade, then more creatures will appear and you'll see a whole different range of sounds. Then the frogs and the amphibians come in as the forest gets taller and there are epiphytes. And then the full-throated voice of a mature forest. You realize then that the forest also has a voice that continues from the start to the time when it is full-throated and is a mature forest.
එකයි කෑවේ. ඒ ඉතින් මතක් විතර නේද?
ඒක නිකන් ඒකයි නේද? එයාලට ටයිම් එකක් කොහොමද?
The question, right? Is this a forest? Right? Here there are tall trees, but only one kind. And it's not giving space for anything else to live in it. The question is this a forest?